Whitmore University sat on the north side of Chicago, where the buildings were old and the money was older. The Applied Mathematics department occupied the fourth floor of Harrove Hall. Polished floors, locked offices, framed awards behind glass. Everyone who walked those halls had earned their place or believed they had. Tanya Turner walked those halls too, every night with a mop. She was 31 years old and had been cleaning Harrove Hall for 6 years. Before that, she cleaned office buildings downtown. Before that, a hospital on the south side. Before that, she tried not to think about before that. At 16, Tanya scored a perfect SAT in Mississippi, not just in math, everything. Her teachers called her a prodigy, and the local paper ran her photograph. A college in Jackson offered her a full scholarship. She never went. Her mother grew sick the summer before senior year with stage 3 ovarian cancer, and her father left 2 weeks after the diagnosis, packing a bag and walking out the front door for good. Tanya was 17 with a dying mother and a 9-year-old sister who still needed someone to braid her hair before school. So Tanya dropped out, took 2 jobs, and held her mother's hand through chemotherapy until there was no hand left to hold. Then she packed up her sister and moved to Chicago because someone told her the pay was better up north. 14 years had passed since Tanya last sat in a classroom. But every night after her shift, she pulled a worn notebook from the bottom of her supply cart, pages soft from use, edges curled, and solved equations. Not simple ones, but graduate-level differential equations, topology proofs, and number theory puzzles found in discarded journals left on professors' desks. She solved them quietly, alone, for no one but herself. No degree, no audience, no recognition. The notebook went back under the bleach bottles before sunrise. Garrett Thornton ran the department. He had run it for 11 years and he made sure everyone knew it. His name was on the door, on the letterhead, and on 3 national awards mounted in the lobby. He published in journals most people could not pronounce, sat on grant committees, and decided who received funding, lab space, and a future. He called Tanya the mop girl, not behind her back but to her face, in front of students, visiting scholars, and anyone standing close enough to hear. He once told a group of freshmen that if they failed his midterm, they would end up pushing a cart like her. No one corrected him. And Tanya never responded. She just kept mopping. There was one person who watched. Eleanor Voss had been chair of the department before Thornton. Now 62 and retired from teaching, she still held the title of honorary advisor, coming to campus 3 evenings a week mostly to sit in the back of seminars in silence. 2 months prior, Voss stayed late to retrieve her reading glasses from Lecture Hall B. The lights were off but someone was writing on the blackboard. It was Tanya, alone in the dark hall, chalk in hand, filling the board edge to edge with a proof. Voss recognized a variation of a problem from her own doctoral thesis 40 years earlier. Tanya did not see her. Voss stood in the doorway for 6 minutes, then left without saying a word to anyone. But she started returning to campus more often after that. Now, a new problem sat on the board in Lecture Hall B, a nonlinear partial differential equation Thornton had assigned to his best graduate students 2 weeks prior. None of them had solved it. 3 had tried and failed publicly during seminars. Thornton was furious not because the problem mattered but because the failure reflected poorly on him. With a major open seminar approaching, 200 seats filled with outside guests, visiting researchers and department donors, Thornton needed someone to blame for the silence on that board. He did not know it yet, but the person who could solve it was already inside the building, pushing a mop through the back door at 7:15 on a Tuesday evening. The seminar started at 7:30. Every seat was filled. Thornton stood at the front, hands behind his back and chin raised, owning the room and everyone in it. The unsolved equation remained on the board. Thornton had spent the last 10 minutes dressing down his students for it. "This is a department of mathematics," he said, "not a department of excuses." No one responded. No one dared. Tanya entered through the side door with her cart, bucket, and mop. The same routine, the same time, the same invisible entrance she made every Tuesday and Thursday. She moved along the far wall toward the back windows, head down, cleaning as she went. Thornton saw her. He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes tracking her across the room the way a man watches something beneath him. A slow smile pulled at one corner of his mouth. He glanced at the board, then back at Tanya and finally at the crowd. The idea landed on his face before he spoke. "You," he pointed at Tanya. "Come here." She stopped and looked up. 200 faces turned toward her. "Yes, you. Bring yourself up here. Leave the bucket." Tanya set down the mop and walked to the front. Students shifted in their seats. A few pulled out phones. Thornton picked up a piece of chalk, held it out to her, and his grin widened. "You see that equation on the board? My best students, people with doctoral degrees, cannot solve it." He paused, letting the silence land. "So, let us see what the cleaning lady can do." Laughter filled the room, loud and immediate. "My students need a good laugh," Thornton said, looking at his audience rather than Tanya. "Go ahead, pick up the chalk. Give it your best shot." More laughter followed. Someone in the third row held up a phone with a red light blinking. Another student typed rapidly on a laptop, and the words janitor versus equation appeared in a campus group chat within seconds. Tanya stood at the front of the room under the gaze of 200 people, not one of whom expected anything but failure. She looked at the chalk in Thornton's hand, then at the board. The equation was dense. 3 lines of notation, Greek symbols, and partial derivatives stacked in a structure she recognized immediately. She had seen this class of problem before in her notebook at 2 in the morning, sitting on an overturned bucket in a supply closet. 5 seconds passed. The laughter faded into whispers. Tanya took the chalk, turned to the board, and ignored the crowd and Thornton entirely. She placed the chalk against the surface and began to write. The first line appeared, clean, precise, without hesitation. Then came the second, a substitution that shifted the structure of the equation into something simpler, a move requiring foresight 3 steps ahead. Thornton's smile slipped a fraction. He tilted his head. Tanya kept writing line after line, her hand steady. She wrote the way someone writes when they have done it 1,000 times before, not performing, not proving, just solving. The room grew quiet, shifting from the polite quiet of a listening audience to the airless quiet of people realizing they were watching something they did not understand. 1 minute passed. Tanya did not stop. The smile on Garrett Thornton's face vanished entirely. 2 minutes passed. Tanya's chalk moved across the board with a rhythm foreign to that room. Short strokes for constants, long sweeps for integrals, and a pause of half a breath before each substitution as if confirming what she already knew. Students closest to the board leaned forward. A girl in the front row set her phone down, forgetting she was holding it. 3 minutes. Tanya placed the chalk on the ledge, stepped back, and turned around. Her face showed no pride and no triumph, just the calm expression of a woman who had done something ordinary. The board behind her was full. Every line was precise, every step connected to the last like unbroken links in a chain. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only motion in the room was a thin curl of chalk dust drifting down from the board. A professor in the 4th row, Dr. Raymond Hale, visiting from the University of Michigan, stood up. He walked to the board, adjusted his glasses, and ran his finger along the first substitution, then the second, then the third. He turned to the room. It is correct. 2 words. They landed like a brick through glass. Thornton stood at the side of the stage with crossed arms and a tight jaw, motionless since the second minute when Tanya's chalk began outpacing his best students. That is impossible, Thornton said, his voice flat. She saw the answer somewhere, copied it. Anyone can memorize a proof. Dr. Hale shook his head. This is not the standard approach. She used a lateral substitution in step 4 that I have never seen applied to this class of equation. This is original work. The room shifted. Chairs creaked and whispers rippled through the rows. A teaching assistant in the 5th row opened his laptop, his hands shaking as he cross-referenced the steps. Thornton felt the room slipping. The silence had turned against him, giving people time to think thoughts he wanted to prevent. He stepped forward, his face flushing dark red. Then give her another one right now. A problem she has never seen. No preparation. No tricks. He grabbed a marker from the tray, turned to the board, and erased Tanya's solution with 3 wide sweeps of his sleeve. He scribbled a new equation, longer, more layered, a boundary value problem wrapped inside a system of coupled differentials. He capped the marker, stepped aside, and pointed at the board with 2 fingers the way one points at an expected failure. Go ahead, impress us again. The sarcasm was thick, but underneath it lay worry, something Thornton would never admit. Tanya did not respond or look at him. She picked up the chalk, paused, tilted her head to the right, and narrowed her eyes. She studied the equation the way a locksmith studies a lock, with patience rather than doubt. She tapped the chalk once against the ledge, not out of hesitation, and began. Her approach shifted. She started from the boundary conditions and worked backward, the mathematical equivalent of solving a maze from the exit. It was unconventional, risky, and required visualizing the entire structure of the problem at once. Every branch, dead end, and hidden passage, before writing a single symbol. Most people in the room would not have attempted it. Those who understood held their breath. 4 minutes passed in total silence. Tanya finished, set the chalk down, and stepped back. Dr. Hale did not wait this time. He was at the board before she turned around. He checked each step, paused at the 3rd line, leaned closer, and straightened up. Correct. And elegant. The word hung in the air, elegant, a designation reserved for published theorems and tenured research, not for a woman in a gray-blue uniform with bleach stains on her sleeves. But there it was. The atmosphere in the room shifted. It was quiet, but every person felt the floor move beneath them. Students who had been filming lowered their phones. A few began writing in their notebooks, not mocking tweets or group chat jokes, but actual notes copying her method, steps, and logic. In the back row, a woman with gray hair and sharp eyes allowed herself a small smile. Eleanor Voss had waited 2 months for this moment in no rush. She folded her hands in her lap and watched. At the front of the stage, Thornton stood rigid, arms at his sides and chin dropped. The red in his face had deepened, and he looked at Tanya the way a man looks at a crack spreading through his foundation. She met his eyes, held them for 2 full seconds and said nothing. He looked away first. Tanya bent down, picked up her mop, returned to her cart and placed it in the bucket. Gripping the handle, she resumed cleaning as if the last 10 minutes had never occurred. As she passed the 3rd row, a student whispered, "Who is she?" The one beside him shook his head slowly. "I have no idea." Nobody had an answer. A cleaning lady had just done what their entire department could not twice and then returned to mopping. But Thornton knew, and his expression showed he was already planning his next move. The equation was solved, but the conflict between them had just begun. By Wednesday morning, the video was everywhere. Not on the news or official channels but on group chats, campus forums, and a private thread in the graduate mathematics community that was no longer private. Someone had recorded the entire exchange. Both equations, both solutions, and Thornton's face when the visiting professor said, "Elegant." The clip had no title. People simply called it the janitor video. Within 48 hours, it reached 400,000 views with comments piling up faster than anyone could read. Half of them asked the same question the student in the 3rd row had asked. Who is she? Tanya remained unaware. She lacked social media and did not check campus forums. She showed up for her Wednesday night shift as usual, pushing her cart with headphones plugged into nothing just to deter conversation. Garrett Thornton, however, was acutely aware of every single view. He sat in his office Thursday morning with the door closed and the blinds drawn. For 11 years he had built his reputation on published papers, national awards and federal grants bearing his name, training doctoral students now holding positions at 3 different universities. He was the department. Yet the most watched video coming out of his domain featured a cleaning lady making his best students look like children. The humiliation sat in his throat like a bone. Thornton was not a man who lost. He was a man who changed the rules until losing became impossible. Following phone calls on Thursday and Friday, everything was arranged by Monday. The Midwest Invitational Mathematics Challenge, an annual event featuring 8 universities rotating campuses, hosted this year at Whitmore. It was a graduate-level competition spanning 3 rounds, timed, public, and judged by a 5-member regional panel. Thornton entered the staff lounge while Tanya was refilling her supply cart. Remaining standing, he positioned himself close enough to force her to look up. "You think you're smart?" he said. "You think that little stunt in my seminar made you something?" Tanya said nothing, continuing to load paper towels into the cart without breaking rhythm or raising her eyes. "Here's what's going to happen." Thornton placed a printed sheet on top of her cart. "The Midwest Invitational. 3 weeks from now you are going to compete." Tanya looked at the paper, then at him. "If you lose, and you will, you are done here. Fired. I will make sure no building on this campus hires you again." His voice was controlled, bearing the tone of a man issuing a generous warning. "And if I win?" Tanya asked, the first full sentence she had spoken to him in 6 years. Thornton blinked once, straightened his tie and replied, "If you win, I will apologize in front of the entire department on record." He offered it like a bet he believed he could not lose. Tanya studied him for a long moment, thinking of her sister, the rent, and the fact that this invisible, thankless job stood between her family and nothing. She could refuse, walk away, keep mopping, and solve equations at 2 in the morning in silence. She could remain invisible. But Tanya Turner had been invisible for 14 years, and for the first time, someone stood before her daring her to be seen. "I'll do it," she said. Thornton offered the thin, satisfied smile of a man springing a trap before turning and walking out. He had no idea whom he had just challenged, assuming he was sending a janitor into a room full of doctoral candidates with a pre-written outcome. What no one knew was the identity of the person who would stand across from Tanya in the final round. Bradley Ashford, 26 years old, Thornton's own research assistant, whom Thornton had personally trained for 4 years and once called the future of the department. Not a room full of strangers or a standardized test, but the finest student Thornton had produced, a man built and polished from scratch to reflect Thornton's own beliefs. Meanwhile, in the back of Harrove Hall, Eleanor Voss received a copy of the competition registration. Pausing at one name on the entry list, she closed her laptop, picked up her phone and made a call that could not wait. 3 weeks. That was all Tanya had, 21 days to prepare for a competition designed for people who spent years inside classrooms, backed by advisors, textbooks, databases, whiteboards, study groups, and time. Tanya had none of those. She had a mop, a supply closet, and her own mind. And Garrett Thornton was determined to ensure even that proved insufficient. His first move involved altering her schedule. Monday morning brought a building services notice. Effective immediately, her shift moved from nights to afternoons, 1 p.m. to 9 p.m., the exact hours the math library and study rooms remained open, denying her access to prep time. It was no coincidence, given Thornton sat on the facility's advisory board. One email sufficed. Tanya accepted the new schedule without comment, shifting her study hours to begin at 10 p.m. at her South Side apartment using a kitchen table, a single lamp, and loose paper bought from a dollar store. Thornton's second move restricted access. The department's digital archive, thousands of papers, lecture notes, and problem sets, required a university login. Tanya had one as a staff member, but by Wednesday of the first week, her access was revoked due to a supposed system error, nothing personal. She made no calls and filed no complaints, recognizing a familiar type of man who smiled while closing doors and blamed others for not walking through them. She worked with what she retained in her head and found in the margins of discarded journals near recycling bins. The third move came via a department meeting where Thornton announced without naming names that associating with non-academic staff regarding competition preparation violated departmental policy, threatening consequences for anyone caught helping her. Isolation complete, Tanya stood on an island without a bridge or boat as the clock ticked down. The campus split, with most taking the safe route of ignoring the situation, though private chats buzzed constantly. A janitor at the Midwest Invitational was labeled inspiring by some and a joke by most. Bradley Ashford ignored the chatter entirely. Training 6 hours a day with full library access, 3 years of competition experience and a decade's worth of his advisor's personal problem sets, he remained unconcerned. 1 week passed. Tanya spent every free hour solving problems in her apartment while her sister Naomi took over cooking, laundry, and household chores. Some nights, Naomi found her at midnight writing on the backs of grocery receipts after running out of paper, or simply staring at a wall with her eyes moving as if reading invisible text, building proofs from memory. 2 weeks in, with 14 days remaining, a hardbound book appeared on Tanya's supply cart on a Wednesday morning without a note or name. Advanced Methods in Analytic Number Theory, 3rd edition, a $160 text. Its spine was cracked from use, and the front cover bore a small library stamp, property of E. Voss Personal Collection. Finding the hallway empty, Tanya slid the book under the bleach bottles in her cart. She said nothing, but that night she read the first section. Reaching Chapter 4, which covered a technique for decomposing nonlinear systems into solvable layers, she sat up straight, pulse quickening. It was the missing tool. 3 days before the competition, Thornton made his final move. Gerald, a cleaning staff colleague from the East Wing, informed Thornton that Tanya kept a small spiral-bound notebook of equations hidden in her locker. By Thursday afternoon, the locker was opened, the notebook confiscated as unauthorized personal items stored on university property, and an official notice issued on department letterhead. Though Thornton's name was absent, Tanya knew. 14 years of problem solutions worked out in the dark, in closets, on buses, and during lunch breaks were gone. She sat on the floor of the supply room with her back against the wall and eyes closed. 14 years. Thousands of hours. Reduced to an empty locker and a printed notice. For the first time, her hands and the space behind her ribs felt entirely hollow. Reaching down, she loosened the insole of her left shoe and pulled out 3 folded pages. She had started keeping backups after Thornton altered her schedule. Not everything, but enough. Key identities, substitution tricks, and patterns absent from any textbook. She unfolded the pages on the floor, smoothed them with her palm, and started again. The next day, Eleanor Voss found Tanya in the east stairwell during a break, their first direct conversation. Standing one step above Tanya, Voss looked down not with Thornton's condescension, but with the focused attention of a surgeon. "The competition is the day after tomorrow," Voss said. "I know." Voss paused. "Then the numbers don't care who's holding the chalk." Tanya looked up, recognition flashing behind her eyes, not tears or anger, but a quieter realization of being seen by someone who understood. Voss turned, walked back up the stairs, and her footsteps faded. Tanya folded the 3 pages and slid them back into her shoe. Across campus in the faculty lounge, the Midwest Invitational bracket hung on the corkboard listing 16 competitors across 8 schools. Tanya's name sat at the bottom in blue pen, accompanied by the handwritten affiliation custodial staff. Above the bracket, Thornton had pinned a note, "May the best mind win." It was meant as a joke, but the humor would not last. 4 days prior, insomnia kept Tanya staring at her ceiling while Naomi slept. Running through competitive mathematics problem types, time structures, and traps, her attention snagged on the published work of Garrett Thornton, specifically his most famous paper, which earned him the Harlan Prize and department chair. Section 4 contained a proof that did not hold. While the conclusion and final answer were correct, the path had a logical gap skipping a necessary condition. It was neither a typo nor shorthand, but a hole missed by fast-moving peer reviewers yet glaringly obvious to a mathematician accustomed to silent scrutiny. Checking it 3 times, on paper, mentally, and via a counterexample, revealed the proof broke precisely where suspected. This meant Thornton had either missed a fundamental error or utilized borrowed, adapted work dressed in his own notation to pass as original. Tanya did not know which, and she did not care. The man who called her a mop girl, humiliated her, threatened her job, locked her out of resources, confiscated her notes, and turned the department against her stood upon a cracking foundation. Without telling anyone, she folded the counterexample into her shoe alongside the other pages. The stakes had shifted. The Midwest Invitational was no longer just about proving her place, but exposing the truth hidden beneath award plaques for 2 decades. And Tanya Turner was the only person who could see it. 2 days before the event, Thornton fired his final shot via an email to the applied mathematics faculty regarding unauthorized competition entry. Polite, professional, and devastating across 3 paragraphs, it noted that a custodial staff member lacking academic credentials or scholarly standing had registered, recommended voiding the registration immediately, and copied the organizing committee, dean, and provost. By noon, the thread accumulated 32 replies calling the situation a circus and an embarrassment. Campus forums lit up by afternoon with a thread titled "Should Janitors Compete in Academic Events?" gathering 140 comments in 3 hours. This is what happens when you let people in who don't belong. She solved 2 problems. Cool. I can make a free throw doesn't mean I'm in the NBA. Has anyone actually verified she didn't cheat? Learning of the email at 4 p.m. while emptying a second-floor trash can? Hearing a graduate student laugh while looking at a phone nearby, Tanya retreated to the supply room, sat on her overturned bucket and stared at her shoes. For the first time, the full weight of her endeavor pressed down, a 31-year-old cleaning lady entering a room of doctoral candidates against every stacked system. Hovering her thumb over Naomi's number to call and quit, ready to admit defeat and concede they were right, she stopped. Hearing her sister's hopeful, worried voice would break her resolve permanently. The door opened to reveal Eleanor Voss holding a manila envelope with a calm, resolute expression. "Stand up," Voss said. When Tanya remained seated, Voss stepped inside and placed the envelope on the shelf. "Open it." Inside lay a formal letter on Whitmore University letterhead addressed to the Midwest Invitational Organizing Committee, confirming Tanya's eligibility under the sponsorship of the Department of Applied Mathematics, approved and signed by the honorary academic advisor. Eleanor Voss's bold, unhesitating signature sat at the bottom. "I signed it this morning," Voss said. "Hand-delivered it to the committee chair an hour ago. It is done. You are in." Tanya held the letter, her fingers pressing into the paper until the edges curled. "Why?" The word scraped out like it had sat in her chest for years. Voss regarded her for a long time. "Because I watched you solve a problem in the dark that half my department cannot solve in the light, and I am too old to keep pretending I didn't see it." She turned, walked out and left the door open. Sitting in the supply room for another 10 minutes without crying or smiling, Tanya pressed the letter to her chest and breathed. Then she stood, retrieved the folded pages from her shoe, placed them beside the bleach and paper towels and returned to work, not on floors but on equations. The Midwest Invitational filled Whitmore's 500-seat Grand Lecture Hall to capacity. 16 desks sat on stage beneath a digital timer, evaluated by 5 regional judges, while reporters from 2 local outlets and a national blog populated the audience due to the viral video. Tanya entered through the side entrance wearing her usual attire, carrying no briefcase, laptop, or notes, just herself and her mind. A murmur rippled through the crowd as phones appeared and a flash went off in the 4th row. 500 people watched a cleaning lady approach a competition desk, entirely unaware of what would follow. At the VIP table, Thornton sat with crossed arms beside a glass of untouched water and a calm, prepared Bradley Ashford. Round 1. 16 competitors, 30 minutes, 3 problems of increasing difficulty. As the timer started, Tanya read the first problem and began writing without hesitation or erasure. Finishing the first, she immediately turned the page for the second. Competitors around her hunched over desks scribbling frantically while one buried his head in his hands. Tanya completed all 3 with 11 minutes remaining, setting her pencil down to wait with folded hands while no one else finished. Results: Tanya Turner, perfect score, fastest time by 6 minutes. Bradley Ashford placed second. Thornton's jaw tightened. Round 2, 8 competitors, 45 minutes, for harder problems separating those who knew mathematics from those who felt it. Tanya finished with 8 minutes left, her expression unchanged since the start, performing no theatrics, just solving. Top 4. Tanya Turner, Bradley Ashford, Elaine Korvick from Northwestern and Warren Briggs from Iowa. The janitor led the competition while Thornton remained frozen in his chair like old cement, gripping his armrests. Semifinals. Head-to-head, 1 problem, 15 minutes, first correct answer advancing. Tanya faced Briggs, who held 3 published papers and 6 years of experience. He lasted 9 minutes, Tanya finished in 7. Walking over, Briggs shook her hand and said, "That was beautiful," meaning it. Bradley Ashford defeated Korvick in 12 minutes in clean, efficient fashion. The final, Tanya Turner versus Bradley Ashford. Silence blanketed the hall as phones rose and people lined the back wall. Thornton leaned forward for the first time with clasped, white-knuckled hands. The projector displayed the final problem, a long, multi-layered system of coupled nonlinear differential equations with self-folding boundary conditions, the sort of problem requiring working mathematicians a week to solve. They had 15 minutes. Bradley attacked directly with quick, confident strokes born of coaching and private sessions with Thornton. Tanya started slower, reading the problem twice, tilting her head, tapping her eraser once and twice before beginning. Where Bradley broke the system into components, Tanya stepped back to examine the underlying structure, hidden symmetry, and connecting patterns visible only by listening to the question rather than forcing an answer. At 10 minutes, Bradley hit a wall, his direct approach resulting in a dead end at step 4. His handwriting shrank as he backtracked and glanced at Tanya's desk, where she continued writing steady, unhurried, clean lines filling the page. Looking back at Thornton yielded no expression. Thornton sat as still as stone. At 12 minutes, Tanya set her pencil down, folded her hands and looked at the judges. The head judge approached her desk, read through the 4 lines, adjusted his glasses, reread the 4th line and consulted the other judges. 30 seconds later he stepped to the microphone. The solution is correct and complete. The hall erupted. 500 people rose to a standing ovation filling the room from floor to ceiling. Strangers grabbed each other's arms, students who had bet against her stood open-mouthed, and a woman in the 3rd row cried without knowing why. Bradley laid down his unfinished paper, walked over and extended his hand. Congratulations. His voice remained steady, masking whatever he felt behind his eyes. Tanya shook his hand in silence, her expression giving nothing away. Then came the unexpected moment. The head judge returned to the microphone. The winner may address the audience if she wishes. Walking to the front of the stage, Tanya stood quietly with her hands at her sides. I have one thing to say, and it is not about this competition. The room stilled as she turned toward Thornton's table and looked directly at him. Professor Thornton's 2006 paper, Convergent Series in Nonlinear Boundary Frameworks, contains an error in the central proof. Section 4, Step 11. The conditional convergence assumption is applied to a series that does not meet the Dirichlet criterion. The conclusion holds, but the proof path is invalid. Pausing to let the words settle, she added, I found this 4 days ago. I constructed a counterexample. I have it here. Reaching into her shoe, she pulled out the 3 folded pages and held them up before 500 breathless people. The proof as written cannot be reproduced, which means either it was a mistake or it was never his to begin with. Placing the pages on the judge's table, she stepped back, returned to her desk, sat down, and folded her hands as if turning in homework. Garrett Thornton stood, pushing his chair back with an open mouth, his face shifting from red to white to colorlessness. A man watching his life's work unravel in real time before everyone who ever respected him. He spoke no words because none came. The room remained motionless except for Eleanor Voss slowly rising to her feet in the 6th row. With unhurried patience, Voss walked to the stage, approached the microphone, and picked up Tanya's 3 folded pages from the judge's table, unfolding them slowly. My name is Eleanor Voss, former chair of the Department of Applied Mathematics at Whitmore University. I have something to add to what Miss Turner just said. Turning to the table, she continued, I have known about the flaw in Professor Thornton's 2006 paper for 7 years. I identified it myself, raised it privately with the department, and was told in writing to let it go. A ripple went through the audience as chairs shifted and reporters typed. I did not have the proof Miss Turner has, I had suspicion. She has certainty. Holding up the pages, Voss stated, these 3 pages contain a counterexample that invalidates the core proof of the most cited paper in our department's history, a paper that earned the Harlan Prize and made a career. Looking at Thornton, she added, the original proof belongs to Dr. Samuel Okafor, a visiting scholar from Nigeria who worked at Whitmore in 2004. He died in 2009. His unpublished notes were archived in the university's restricted collection. Professor Thornton had sole access to that archive for 6 years. The room held its breath. I submitted a formal request for investigation to the American Mathematical Society this morning before the competition began. Regardless of today's outcome. Voss placed the pages back on the table and folded her hands. Thornton stood behind his chair, his fingers gripping the back as his mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The head judge leaned into the microphone. Professor Thornton, do you wish to respond? Silence stretched, 5 seconds 10. Thornton released the chair, straightened his jacket, turned and walked toward the exit. No one followed or called out. 500 people watched him cross the hall, push through the double doors and disappear into the corridor. The doors swung shut, marking the final sighting of Garrett Thornton at Whitmore University. 2 weeks later, Whitmore University announced that Tanya Turner was offered a full research scholarship, tuition stipend, and a private study in the mathematics building, becoming the oldest first-year graduate student in department history and the first to enter from a supply closet rather than a classroom. She accepted. On her first day, she walked through the front door of Harrove Hall, not the side entrance or service corridor but the front door, with a pencil still tucked behind her ear. Naomi sat in the first row without taking notes, simply watching her older sister stand at the front of a room where no one laughed. Eleanor Voss attended as well, shaking Tanya's hand at the end and offering 2 words, welcome home. The American Mathematical Society investigation into Garrett Thornton moved swiftly, confirming his proof overlapped 94% with Dr. Samuel Okafor's unpublished notes. Thornton was stripped of the Harlan Prize, his tenure was revoked, and 3 of his published papers were flagged for review. He never apologized, simply disappearing from a world built upon someone else's work. 3 months later on a Tuesday evening, Tanya worked late in her new office. A desk, a lamp, and a whiteboard covering the wall, marking her first room meant for thinking rather than cleaning. Uncapping a marker, she stood at the whiteboard and began to write without an audience, timer, or observer. Just Tanya Turner and the numbers as it had always been and would always be.